All right, good morning once again, everybody. If you are just now joining us, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat so we can get an idea of who all is here. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's counselor workshop on tricky FAFSA situations. I'm really excited to have a couple of great panelists here that we're going to introduce in just a second to talk about specific scenarios that you might encounter when working with students through the FAFSA, which is in itself a complicated form even in the best case scenario, but a lot of times we have students that either their parent situation or their financial situation or their college application situation makes it all just a little bit more complicated. So we're going to address some of those scenarios and give you some suggestions on how to navigate through them. So if you're here joining us live, thank you. I know it is a crazy time of year. I also know we have lots of people that are that have requested the recording to be received later. So if you're watching from the future, hello, I hope all is well. Just a quick introduction of myself. If you are new to the Path to College Counselor Workshops, my name is Carolyn. I started Path to College in January of 2020. So we are working on year 3 now to provide resources and professional development and other types of support to school counselors across the state. I was a school counselor myself at the KIPP High School here in Nashville, as well as Republic High School. I worked in the admissions office at Vanderbilt and now work with both Path to College and Persist Nashville, 2 nonprofits here in town. So really excited to be here with you guys. Definitely feel free to continue making use of the chat to share information, ask questions, whatever the case may be. We have a relatively small group here, so definitely feel free to jump in whenever you like if you have specific questions. So I want to start by introducing our panelists here today. I'm so excited to have both Rita and Mireya here to join us, and I will give them a chance to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their roles. So I'll hand it off to you, Rita.
Hi, thank you so much for having us today. I'm so excited. My name, Rita Turchetta. So I am an outreach specialist for East Tennessee for the Tennessee Higher Education Commission and the Tennessee Student Assistance Corporation. We are the state agency that administers the state grant and scholarship programs. And I noticed a few names that I'm familiar with in the chat. So those that know me know that this is my favorite time of the year. I was telling Miss Carolyn that, some people like, pumpkin spice latte. I love FAFSA season. It's my favorite time. So thank you so much for having me today.
I'll jump in. Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Mireya Sandoval. I'm the Senior Director of State Consulting here at uAspire. I also have a background a lot on training. So back in the day, I was part of the training team here at uAspire. So I know all things FAFSA training, student aid report, verification, all the fun topics around college affordability. So very excited to be able to be here with you all today. And just to share a little bit more about uAspire, we are a national nonprofit and we're hyper-focused on college affordability. So our main focus is to be able to support our students and to find an affordable path to and through college. And how we support our students is through our 3 impact models, which are direct service. So we have a lot of advising expertise throughout the years. From all the years of advising, we've developed a lot of trainings. And now we're also hopefully causing some changes in the systems when their policy team there as well. So just a little bit about uAspire. So very excited to be here with you all today. And I did share with Caroline a few more resources that we have on our website. Really invite you all to take a look. Some of our student resources, a few of our financial aid events that we have in-house as well. There's also some resources here in case you have questions around like tax filing thresholds. There's always the questions about like, should I file taxes? Did my parents file their taxes? Also, if you need any financial aid appeal resources here as well, I've linked it in here. And also, I know there's a lot of questions around the student loan debt relief plan that's coming out. So just included our FAQs that we have on our site as well in case they might be helpful.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies. And I will send out this PowerPoint so you guys will have access to all of these links. And I definitely encourage you after this workshop to dive more into both the TSAC and the uAspire websites. They're both 2 of my favorite places to steal documents and tools from. I've been using uAspire's getting ready for the CSS profile checklist for literally years. So really great resources all around. And again, I'll send that information out afterwards. So if you've never attended a Path to College counselor workshop before, we're going to start off with a little bit of a mic check. Just make sure everybody is still with us before we dive in and on their toes and engaged. Today is International Artist Day. So question for both our panelists and also attendees, throw your answer in the chat here. If you were an artist, what type of artist would you be? Rita, what you got? Broke.
Yeah, definitely broke. I like the spray paint.
There you go.
That's good.
Oh, somebody who makes jewelry. That's fantastic. Photography. I had dreams in high school of becoming a photographer, and I was terrible at it. I would probably be some kind of writer, poetry, novels, things like that, if I had the time. Excellent. Continue putting those responses, and we of course could go on a whole tangent about how being a school counselor really is an art in itself, but absolutely interior design is an art form. My stepmom is an interior designer, and that is an underrated like friend to have, somebody who can help you like orient furniture and pick things for the walls. Crafts, excellent. All right, so everybody's homework is to do something artistic over the next week. It's a really great form of just like decompressing and therapy and feeding your soul a little bit. All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump in. Again, continue putting your responses there in the chat. If you haven't introduced yourself in the chat, please continue to do that. You can also use it for questions throughout the session. So like I said at the top, we are talking about tricky FAFSA situations today. And I know that many of you are very familiar with the FAFSA at this point, but I also know that we have some first and second year counselors that have registered for. So I wanted to give a little bit of a quick overview of what exactly the FAFSA is. Like, what is the purpose? What is the point of this whole form? Why are we putting all of this effort into making sure that our students complete it? The direct purpose of filling out the FAFSA is to identify this number called the EFC, the student's estimated family contribution. And this number is essentially based on all of your and your family's financial figures and situations and assets and all of that stuff. What is the amount of money that the federal government is saying you and your family can afford to contribute to your college education? Now, how accurate that number is a whole other question in itself, but that is the number that pops out at the end of this form. The indirect purpose of the FAFSA is that colleges and scholarship programs and state and federal funding organizations will use that number to decide how much need-based financial aid the student is eligible for. So when students ask, what is the FAFSA? It's basically a form to determine how much need-based financial aid students are eligible for. And colleges across the board are going to require it. A lot of scholarship programs require it. Again, state programs will require it. It's required for Tennessee Promise and Hope and all of these things. So it's really important that students, if nothing else, in regards to financial aid, do complete this form. The FAFSA is often used as a predictor of other college-going activities. So you might see a lot of statistics around X percentage of students are on track or can be expected to enroll in college. A lot of times those numbers are based, at least in part, on how many of those students have completed the FAFSA. It's also often used as a metric for success for college access programs. So whether that's a counseling program within a high school or a CBO or a particular outreach initiative, a lot of times FAFSA completion will be used to show that students are ready for and intend to enroll in college. It's also an opportunity for students to develop some really important professional skills that they will utilize in college and in a career. A lot of times is the first time that they're having conversations with their parents about family finances and about income taxes and learning what those things are, having to reach out to financial aid offices and have conversations with the professional adults that they don't know, working on those communication skills. So it's a great opportunity for students to kind of dip their toe into the world outside of their high school and their family and start to learn some important skills that will translate into college and beyond. A couple other just quick things to know in terms of timeline. The FAFSA became available on October 1st. That is pretty consistent from year to year. And the deadline specifically for Tennessee Promise, which is kind of considered the like statewide deadline it's best for students to complete the FAFSA by, is March 1st. It has been February 1st in the past. Thank you, Rita, for catching this. I had copied and pasted over from previous years. It is now March 1st, so you have a little bit more breathing room once the spring semester starts up to get those FAFSAs done. The FAFSA will ask for specific income and tax information, which means that most of the time students and counselors need to complete it in partnership with parents or legal guardians, whatever the case may be, with those tax documents in hand. In addition to the FAFSA, and this is a whole other workshop topic, but just for your radar, a lot of more selective schools will also require a form called the CSS profile that just asks basically for more information about a student family's financial situations. Again, mostly selective schools with really generous need-based financial aid programs are wanting more information to make sure that they're giving a completely accurate assessment of the student's financial needs. So just know, for a lot of students, particularly your higher achieving students, just completing the FAFSA might not be enough. They may have to complete the CSS as well. And also about a third of students, although this is also changing as the verification is starting to be scaled back a little bit as a positive result of the pandemic. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in the spring, but just know that some students may have to go through the verification process as well in order to make sure that their FAFSA remains, is able to be used by colleges. There are big changes coming likely next year with the simplification of the FAFSA, still TBD as to what simplification actually means, whether or not it will actually be simpler for students and counselors to fill out. So just know that a lot of the process information that we talk about this year might be different next year, and we'll, of course, when the time comes, once we get that information, share that with all of you. But just know that this year things are running pretty much as usual when it comes to the FAFSA form itself. Just a quick view of kind of FAFSA completion here by state. These are FAFSA completions for not this current senior class, but last year's senior class. And you'll see Tennessee is the red line here. We have consistently been at the top of the pack or near the top of the pack when it comes to FAFSA completion, which is really excellent. Somehow Louisiana beat us out last year. I didn't know how that happened, but we'll take them this year. So across the board, Tennessee does pretty well in terms of completing the FAFSA, but you'll see even at the top of this pack, it's still only about 75% of students. And some of that other 25% are students that don't need financial aid, students that aren't planning on going to college. But a lot of them are also the type of students that we're going to talk about today, students that have complicated family or financial or college situations for whom completing the FAFSA is a really difficult process. And a lot of times students will quite simply just give up in the process if they don't have the proper support and the patience and the professional skills that they need in order to navigate this process. So that's why we're talking about these topics today. We want to make sure that as many of that 25% who want to complete the FAFSA and want to enroll in college have the opportunity to do so. All right, so that is the end of my spiel. Definitely feel free to send questions during the session or after the session via email if you have other questions about the FAFSA in general and how that works. I'm happy to partner with you and work on those things. But we are here today to play Stump the Financial Aid Experts. We're going to throw up some specific scenarios that counselors have encountered, might encounter when working with students on the FAFSA. And we're going to throw it to Rita and Mireya to tell us a little bit about how they would approach that situation and any advice they have for counselors as they work through these situations. We have a lot of slides here with specific scenarios that have been pulled from what you guys submitted on your registration forms, but if there are other ones that you're thinking of right now, feel free to throw those in the chat and we can address those as well. So I'll alternate who I throw this to, but definitely feel free, you guys, to jump in and follow up on each other's suggestions as we dive in. So the first one here is the student is not a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen, and they do not have a social security number. Rita, how would you help this student?
Unmute myself. So that's harsh. So the student would not be able to actually create an FSA ID, nor would they be able to fill out the FAFSA. However, for the student, I would actually recommend that they go to the college, because some colleges have specific scholarships for DACA students or non-citizens. So that would be my recommendation. I don't think that I would put the student through filling out the FAFSA. That's just me personally.
Yeah, if I could jump in really quick, also just to add a little bit more. Yeah, I would say, yeah, the student will not be eligible to fill out the FAFSA, but I also would recommend, there's a lot of great scholarships out there too. One of my favorite resources is Immigrant Rising. They have the most amazing database of scholarship that does not ask for anything around citizenship or any requirements. And I'll go ahead and chat it here in the chat. Definitely recommend this resource. I know also, I would say rely on local organizations that also may support students. I think I've heard of Conexión Americas in Tennessee, which I feel is an organization that may have some additional resources. I think I've seen on their site also talk about like maybe some schools that are like undocumented, who are friendly to undocumented students as well. So I would say like rely on your community and the resources, and definitely those scholarships, definitely check out that Immigrants Rising database. It's like amazing that they put that together.
Yeah, that is great.
Absolutely. I put the link for Conexión in the chat as well. There's also a Tennessee-based scholarship program called Equal Chance for Education, putting the link in there in the chat as well for that. Both great resources in addition to the Immigrants Rising. I would also point out that a lot of colleges will still offer need-based financial aid to non-citizen students. They just ask them to complete the CSS profile instead of the FAFSA, because the CSS profile doesn't require a social security number. So connecting with the college, asking what the process is, what the opportunities are, but then also, like Mireya said, looking at local organizations, finding out who is available to support these students through the process. Excellent. Second scenario is similar. The student is a US citizen and has a social security number, but the parent is not. Mireya, what's going to be tricky about this situation, and how do students navigate through it?
Yeah, so a student is able to complete their FAFSA even if a parent does not have a social security number. They will sign the FAFSA using a paper, like printing out the signature page, and then they will mail it in. The only thing here is that parents, like, they still will have a concern of like wanting to share their information. They might have a fear of like, I don't know if I want to share my information. What if they get access to my information or deportation, something happens? So I think there's a fear there. So not every parent is going to feel comfortable. So I think talking to the parent and alleviating some of those concerns of like, there's FERPA laws in place that will not, where parents they will not have access to parents' information and so forth. So I think it would take a little bit more of sometimes being a mediator and having a conversation. I think we're having some resources that could be helpful in like just helping parents understand like the process and so forth, I think could be very helpful. But there would be times, and I know that I wish there was a magic wand where we could just be like, don't worry, everything will be fine. But sometimes there will be parents where they'll just be like, no, we don't feel comfortable, and we also have to be respectful. As long as we still share the resources and guide them to the process, I think it would be just more of a hesitation from the parent if they feel comfortable not sharing the information. But they will still be able to submit the FAFSA even if they don't have a social security. The parent does not have a social security number.
Yeah. Hey, may I add, if it's okay, and you may have already said this,
Yeah.
but just make sure when the parent enters all zeros for their social when filling out the FAFSA, that way it will go through the process easily.
Yeah. And just to clarify that, the parent will not be able to create an FSA ID. But Rita's talking about when filling out the actual FAFSA itself, when it asks for parent social, plugging in all zeros there. And that will actually, I don't know if that's still the case this year, but sometimes that will actually trigger we think you've made an error at the end. And that's where students really get tripped up. So literally just get through that. It'll say, is this a mistake? And you'll say, no, that was not a mistake. And it'll just let you pass it. So yeah, great point there. All right, the student is living with a guardian instead of the parent. So I have a student who is living with a grandparent or an aunt or family friends and has been living with them for some time. Does the student include the parents' financial information? Do they include the guardians? Like what's the advice you would give there?
Are you tossing it to me?
Sure, yeah.
All right, sweet. So if the student is in a legal guardianship, so the key is legal guardianship, not custody. In Tennessee, that's very, very specific. It needs to be legal guardianship. Then the student would be considered independent, and parent information nor legal guardian information will be required on the FAFSA application. So just the student's information, and the student would be considered independent. But keep in mind, the college will probably definitely reach out to the student and request documentation providing proof that that student is in a legal guardianship.
Awesome. Mireya, anything you would add there?
No, I would say, yeah, super on point there. I would just say like definitely about the documentation, especially when you know at the beginning, students have to gather information and they already say like mention legal guardianship, really have them have that paper on hand. You never know when that verification request is going to come their way. And that way you could also verify that they are under a legal guardian, the right legal guardianship that is a court order legal guardianship. So just to double check. So definitely having that documentation on hand.
Excellent. Great advice. Documentation is going to be key throughout a lot of these, especially if you're talking about being an independent student or filing a special circumstance. I just put a link in the chat to student aids document on who is my parent. This is a really great resource to just have, even just like post it on the wall in the office during FAFSA season, to guide you through in each of these scenarios, who is considered the parent and whose financial information do you need. So this next scenario, the student knows who the parent is, but the parent is incarcerated. Mireya, how do you approach that situation?
Yeah, so this could be it could be a little bit of depending. So if this is a student, if this is a sole parent who they have connections with, and the parent is incarcerated, then the student could go ahead and fill out the FAFSA. They could list that they are under a special circumstance, knowing that their parent is incarcerated, and they could go ahead and fill out the FAFSA and request like a special circumstance, and then talk to the university, the higher education institution that they're attending. And they could go ahead and pursue a dependency override, especially if they don't have any connection with the parent or anything, or the other parents, they might have another custodial parents, then I would recommend having your custodial parents information into the FAFSA. But I would say if this is their sole parent and they're incarcerated, to pursue a dependency override, and then that way they could be independent on the FAFSA.
Rita, anything to add there?
Now, she did a great job. Just, just on this one, it specifically said one parent. So if the other parent's not incarcerated, just use the other parent's information. That way you eliminate the need for having all that extra paperwork for the financial aid office.
Yep, great point. All right, the next one, the student's parents did not file their income taxes this year. Rita, how would you handle this situation?
Yay. So first, was there a reason why they didn't file their taxes? So if there was a reason that they didn't have to file taxes, and that's pretty simple, just skip the question. I was not required to fill out taxes and move on to the next one. If perhaps they delayed their taxes, so they haven't completed them yet, the student can go in and put, or the parent can go in and put will file and estimate their income tax. However, they will have to go back eventually when they get their taxes done and complete that portion of their income. So they'll have to make amendments to their FAFSA. They'll have to fix that part. I feel like that covered it.
And I would imagine that in most scenarios, students won't necessarily know if their parents were required to file taxes or not. What would be a scenario in which somebody is not required to file income taxes?
So maybe they're getting Social Security, or they're living on, other income that didn't have to be reported on your income tax. So there are a lot of situations where they wouldn't have to file taxes. So they could just skip the question about taxes, because there are a few scenarios like disability or SSI. Is that the same thing? I feel like it is.
I think so. Excellent. Next scenario, the student's parents are divorced and both of them have since gotten remarried. Mireya, whose financial information would the student enter into the FAFSA in that scenario?
Yeah, definitely. And I'll just add really quick on just the previous question really
Yeah.
quick. I would also add that I did like in one of my research slide, I included a tax filing chart for parents. So it tells you like the amounts, like the minimum they have to make in order to have to file taxes. So very important that if you see that parents have not filed and they meet that requirements for filing, that's like a flag for you to share. Also be like, oh, you're required. Also for students, maybe they sometimes make money. I mean, they work, they file, and they make the over that amount of money on the chart. So maybe they will be required to file. So I would say that would be a good resource to know when they need to file, when to be like, hey, make sure to file your taxes. That could be helpful.
Yeah,
Now dive into this.
Sorry, and that's a great point regarding students filing taxes as well. Do you know off the top of your head, either of you, what that amount of money is? Like if a student made X amount of money last year, they should have filed taxes?
Yes, I have it actually right here.
Is it 12,900 or is it 10,900, 10,900? Or is it 12,900 if you're single? I'm dying to know now.
Yeah, 12,550.
I was
There you go.
close.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well done. Yeah.
12,550.
Sure.
So yeah, so very helpful just to keep that charts. Yeah, I would
Yeah.
have it open. Sometimes it's just helpful to double check.
Absolutely. Thank you. right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And jumping now to this question, the student's parents are divorced and both have since gotten married. So in this situation, I think you would first have to look at the two factors. The first factor is asking the question, who is the student living with the most for that award year? So let's say, for example, we have a student, they live with the mom more than the dad for the year. So then you would enter the mom's information and that step parents information onto the FAFSA. You would only enter the step parents information on a FAFSA if the parent, the custodial parent actually remarried. You know, sometimes there's parents who are separated and they might have a partner, but they're not married and they don't have to enter their information unless they're remarried. But let's say, for example, now we have the students, let's say they equal time. They live 50-50 with the mom and the dad. So whose parents would you put on the FAFSA? So then you would then look at the second factor is like whose parent is providing the more financial support to that student. So let's say, for example, the dad is the one that's providing the more financial support to the student, then you will enter the dad's and the step parents information onto the FAFSA. I know that was a little bit of like tricky of there, but just it's first look at the factors of who is the student living with the most, then that would be the parent, the custodial parent. And then if they're equal time, then who's providing the more financial support for the student. And I know there's always going to come up like who claims the students on the taxes, that's the parent. It doesn't matter who claims them on the taxes. It only matters the custody, and FAFSA has their own ways on how they define things. It doesn't mean that just because a parent claims on the taxes that that's the parent you have to put on the FAFSA.
Yep. Excellent point. Rita, anything to add there?
No, she did a great job. I like it.
This was actually the scenario that I was in when I was in high school. And I remember thinking, if I have to put all four incomes in here, then I'm not getting a dime. So I think that's the important thing to remember. You are not putting in four incomes. You're going with one parent and step parent or the other, depending on, like Mireya said, amount of time spent or amount of financial support provided. Okay, students' parents are still married, but they haven't seen their father in 10 years and have no contact with him. So the FAFSA is going to ask for that parent's financial information. They have no contact. They don't know how to contact. How would you handle that situation, Rita?
So this one's a good one because I actually asked my supervisor what he thought because we have two different opinions on this one. So I'm going to give you his. He would list the parents as separated because they haven't seen him in 10 years. The only thing about that is, Tennessee we don't really honor separation like that, but he's got a really good point. I think I would as well go in and put that I'm separated, then isolate mother's information and only put mother's information. In most cases, this mother probably filed head of household anyway. So I feel like that would, I hate to sound confusing because that just came out confusing. So let me just clarify. I would put down that my parents are separated, even though because dad hasn't lived there in 10 years and they just haven't got around maybe to getting divorced. But mom more than likely filed head of household. So it's just her income anyway that's going to go on the FAFSA application. Find at the college, the financial aid office may question that. And I would definitely have a PJ done if for some reason that it did come to having conflict with not having dad's information on the FAFSA, but I would put separated.
When you say get a PJ done?
A professional judgment from the financial aid office.
Gotcha.
Okay. I would jump in really quick here. One of my colleagues says, if they're connected by the heart, they're connected by the FAFSA. So if the parents definitely, if there is a connection of, sometimes there's parents where a dad may, or parents, mom, may be working outside the country or working at a different state, but they're still connected at heart. So they still consider them married as a household. In this scenario, yeah, I would agree. They are separated. They are not under the same household. They have not been connected by the heart by those 10 years. So I would definitely say the student would be considered separate. They will be considered separated on the FAFSA. So definitely feel free to use that one.
I was
It's
just
helpful.
gonna say, I'm going to use that because that is awesome that they're connected by the heart.
Such a,
Information down. That's awesome.
such a romantic approach to completing the FAFSA. I love it.
We have to make it fun. We have to make it fun.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
All right, next scenario for Mireya, the student is living in foster care.
Yeah, so for this one for foster care, so there is a specific guideline on how dependency is determined by foster care on the FAFSA. So they say since the age of 13, if they've been on foster care, they will be considered independent on the FAFSA. So if they were in foster care starting at age 13 or any time from 13 on, then they will be considered independent on the FAFSA and they will not require to enter any parental information onto the FAFSA. If they were in foster care before the age of 13, but now they have parental information that they can enter in the FAFSA, again, the FAFSA only says that since the age of 13 on, they will be considered independent on the FAFSA.
Excellent. And I just threw in the chat the link to student aid's document on am I a dependent or independent student? And being an independent student just means, like Mireya said, you don't have to enter the parents' financial information at all. So as somebody helping a student through the FAFSA, that's always the best surprise is when you find out a student is independent. But that's also a great chart to just have handy when you're working with students. Rita, anything you would add to that response?
Just like with any of the questions where it moves you from a dependent student to an independent student, the college is going to require proof. So just have that proof on hand, just have it ready for the college because they will request that document.
Yeah, absolutely. And just kind of on a personal note, the foster students in foster care are one of the most underserved groups of students that face the biggest challenges in this process. So I always consider myself very lucky when I'm working with a student who is in foster care to be able to help them through this process because it's incredibly important and incredibly rewarding. So definitely give those students some extra love if this is a scenario that you encounter. All right, the student's parent, this is something that came up certainly a lot in 2020 and 2021, but it's obviously still happening. The student's parent lost their job over the summer, and so their 2021 tax returns are no longer representative of their financial situation. The family income has changed drastically because of that loss of a job. I have no idea whose turn it is, but there you go, Rita. You want to jump in on this one?
All right, so 2 steps. The first one is to go ahead and fill out your FAFSA, just like, use the IRS data retrieval tool if you're able to bring in the taxes because that is required. However, make sure in the spring that you're making an appointment with the financial aid office for that PJ, that professional judgment, because that is something the college can do. They can look at your income to see if you might qualify for professional judgment.
Excellent. Mireya, anything to add?
Yes, I would just say, yeah, agree. Yeah, reaching out, letting know the school that their income has changed. Also, we'll send a link here for SWIFT students. They have like a letter. They help you build out these letters that you would send when seeking that dependency override or changes, or if you need support. They have like templates already ready to go where you just kind of fill in your information. So that way it's helpful to help students like move forward in a lot of these like different processes and paperwork. So this is the one for if they're seeking, letting the school know like, hey, our financial situation changed from 2021. And it could be helpful for them to just have a template ready to go and just fill it in.
That's fantastic. I love an email template. Great resource. And just to emphasize, I think kind of a through line here for a lot of these is reaching out to the school's financial aid office, which I know can be really intimidating for students. But helping students understand that like the staff at financial aid offices, their whole job is to help you through this process. So they are a really fantastic resource. Even if there are questions not related directly to that school, like just in general, I have this question about the student's FAFSA or about my FAFSA. Definitely don't hesitate to reach out. I reach out to Vanderbilt's financial aid office all the time about questions, not even related to Vanderbilt applicants, just hey, I have this question about financial aid. They're an excellent resource. All right, next scenario, the student lives with their mother full time, but their father claims them on his taxes. Mireya, I think you addressed this one a little bit if you just want to reiterate the difference here.
Yeah, definitely. Just because a parent claims the students and the taxes, that does not mean they're like, that's the parent that they need to put on the FAFSA. It also doesn't mean because the student is dependent or on the FAFSA means that they're always dependent on the taxes. It doesn't mean they're dependent on the FAFSA too. So I would say yes, just because the father claims them on the taxes, it doesn't mean he would be the parent on the FAFSA. In this case, the student lives majority of the time with the mom full time. So the student will list his mom as the parent on the FAFSA on this one. So again, I know it could be tricky about like dependency on the FAFSA, dependency on the taxes, but again, for the FAFSA, it's completely different.
Remember, guys, it's all about the heart, right?
So yes.
All right, Rita, the student's parents still live in their home country, but the student is living in the US with other relatives. How would you help a student through the process?
I still use the parents' information. And this goes back to the parents if they don't have socials as well. You're still going to enter parent information if they don't have social, enter zeros, but student will still use parent stuff when they fill out the FAFSA. Student income, parent income, same thing. Nothing changes with this scenario.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say also when you're transferring like the income that they make from other currency, definitely use one of those online currency changers. That helps a lot too when you're trying to like change the information to make sure that it matches US dollars still on the FAFSA.
Yeah, great point. And I can just say from my experience, this is often a scenario where you may have to speak to the parent, whether yourself or through the student, to just emphasize the importance of the FAFSA and the stuff that we were talking about at the top, because people who live outside of the US may not necessarily understand. A lot of people who live in the US don't necessarily understand what the FAFSA is and what it's for. I've had multiple conversations where we've just had to lay out, if she does not fill out this form, she will not be able to afford college. And just making sure that that is emphasized so that parents living outside of the US really understand the importance of this process. All right, the student is married and has a child. How do they fill out the FAFSA?
Yeah, so if the student is married and has a child, they will be considered independent on the FAFSA. So they have here, we see two determinations that make the student independent. So the marriage, they're married, and also having a child. This is also making the assumption that if with the child, they're providing 50% of financial support to the child. So that means that the student will be independent. So for these two, the student will not have to enter any parental information on the FAFSA, and it would just be the student's information. It would probably also require their spouse's information on the FAFSA as well, and information. So yeah.
Excellent. Rita, anything to add there?
She did a great job. Sounded good.
Yeah. I always thought one of my strategies was always just arrange a marriage if you don't want to include your financial information. Yeah. All right, Rita, the student's parents are married, but they filed their income taxes separately. How is this going to make things more challenging, and how would you guide a student through it?
Okay, so this is great scenario, and I see this one actually a lot. So if the parents are married and they filed separately, you're not going to be able to use the IRS data retrieval tool. You're going to have to enter this information manually. So just make sure you have both income taxes right in front of you, and you'll just have to put the information together. Just add them together. Just go line by line with what it's asking and just enter both taxes together on the FAFSA.
Mireya, anything to add there?
No, that's good. Yeah, unfortunately, they will not be able to use the IRT. Hopefully, I know they're going to expand the use of the IRS DRT for the next FAFSA simplification. I think that's one of the things that has been shared. So hopefully that helps with that down in the changes for the next year.
Absolutely.
Fingers crossed. And we haven't really talked about the DRT much yet so far. So the DRT, if you haven't used it yet with students, is the tool that will basically automatically upload the parents' tax information based on their name and address and whatever other information they ask them to submit. Now, sometimes the DRT works and sometimes it doesn't. And if you're working with students who are disproportionately in some of the scenarios that we've been talking about, chances are the DRT doesn't work more than it does work, has been my experience anyways. So this is one of the scenarios in which it's not going to work, and you'll just need to enter that information manually. If you have the tax returns in front of you, it is not really that difficult to do. It's just a little bit of work. But it's always a fun surprise when the DRT does work and you don't have to enter all of that information. So if we're expanding the use of that, that's fantastic. That's going to make things a lot easier for a lot of people.
Yeah, and just to add, I went ahead and added a link. We have an IRS DRT video on our website, just linked it here on the chat. If it's helpful just to see how to use the IRS DRT, who will be ineligible to use the IRS DRT, like those scenarios on this one, and so forth. So hopefully it's helpful as you're, I think, going through the IRS DRT with your students.
Excellent.
Here's a tip if you don't mind me throwing this out there.
Please.
I've noticed one reason that you can't pull in from the IRS data retrieval tool is maybe your tax accountant spelled your name wrong or your street wrong. Whatever's on your taxes, do that, fill that out, the IRS data retrieval tool, that information about your street, exactly the same, and hopefully it will pull in for you if you are eligible to use it. If you're eligible to use it, just look at your taxes to see if maybe your accountant did something wrong on that form, because then it should feed in.
Yeah. That is often the great irony of the DRT, is if you don't need your taxes unless it doesn't work, but if it doesn't work, it's because you need your taxes. So,
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's so true.
Yeah. All right. The student is currently living in a homeless shelter. How does that impact how they fill out the FAFSA? I've lost track of whose turn it is again now.
I think so too, but I mean, I could jump in.
Yeah, go for it.
Here, so I think if a student is currently living in a home shelter, I think for the purposes of the FAFSA, they want to make sure that the student is meeting 2 requirements. I know in the specific scenario, it's not saying like if they're with a parent at the homeless shelter or if not. So for example, if this, let's assume that the student is unaccompanied, lacking fixed housing, then the student will be considered independent on the FAFSA if they're meeting those requirements. Sometimes the students and their families might be in the homeless shelter, but they're still accompanied by their parents, so they will still have to enter parental information onto the FAFSA. I think for the FAFSA, they will ask some follow-up questions, like if somebody has made this determination for the students, like maybe somebody like the McKinney Vento liaison at their school, or like a director from a homeless shelter and so forth. If somebody has done that, then they will select that option on the FAFSA. But if nobody has made that determination for the students, they could go ahead and still ask for a financial aid administrator could make this change for the students and make that determination of homelessness on the FAFSA there. So definitely just as long as it meets those 2 requirements on there. So yeah.
Excellent. Rita, anything to add there?
No, I agree. Again, just keep paperwork. Just have a copy of the letters from your school that you can provide to the financial aid office, and make sure you just make an appointment with the financial aid office.
Excellent. All right, our next scenario is one that was unfortunately submitted by one of our registrants, but if the student parent has passed away in the past couple of months. So this speaks to including their information, but also obviously their financial scenario has changed. How would you counsel them through filling out the FAFSA at this point?
So definitely, this is sad. So the parent would not include this deceased parent in the FAFSA. So you'll be able to pull out the the deceased parent's information. I would enter it manually. I mean, you could probably use the IRS. No, I don't think you can, because you're going to put widowed on the FAFSA application. So when you put widowed, it will not let you use the IRS data retrieval tool. So then manually enter the other parent's income. And again, you may still need to talk to the financial aid office, but just manually enter the surviving parent on the FAFSA.
Yeah. Mireya, anything to add there?
No, I don't think so. I think, and I've just been thinking a lot, especially as we're going through a lot of these like tough scenarios, like, deceased parents, like students they have a lot of different familiar circumstances at home. And not all the time will they feel comfortable to want to share like what's happening, what's their situation, and so forth. So I think sometimes it just takes time to build that relationship with your students, and so they can feel comfortable to share that information. And just like ask questions and never assume. Sometimes also like I always have to make sure I check myself to never assume anything, make sure to ask questions, and be mindful that they're going through a lot too, whether it be like different situations, they're still living life, they're still going through the college, thinking about college, high school, everything else that there's going on in their mind. So sometimes that building the relationship piece could take a little bit longer, but just taking that time to do so.
Yeah. And follow up in the chat here, if both of the students' parents have passed away, does that make the student independent, or does it depend on what their custody situation looks like after the fact?
Yes, to both. Like it could make the student independent. I would still follow up with the college and have a dependency override, which is another professional judgment. But yes, they could put down that technically they're a ward of the court. Someone else would have legal guardianship if they're under the age of 18, but still, I'd still go talk to the financial aid office. It's going to be hard, but I would talk to the financial aid office.
Yeah. It would also depend, like if like it's also like since the age of 13, if they had no living parents.
Yeah.
So if like 13 on they had no living parent, they would automatically be independent on the FAFSA. Again, if there was like somebody adopted the student, like an official like adoption, then they would be considered the parent. So I think it all depends on how these scenarios could go in so many different ways. And
yeah, and I would say this is a scenario where typically I would always encourage put the student on the phone, have the student advocate for themselves, et cetera, et cetera. I think this is probably a scenario where maybe just figure it out for them, have that conversation with financial aid for them, and just let the student know what their next steps are, because that's likely all they'll be able to wrap their head around at that point.
I agree. Absolutely.
All right, there's a few minutes left here. I want to move past some of the parent questions and more into just like the logistics of completing the form and getting it to colleges. There are only 10 spots for colleges on the FAFSA at this point. What does a student do if they're planning on applying to more than 10 colleges and they want to be considered for need-based aid at all of them?
Yeah, I would say like students could go ahead and add more than 10 schools onto the FAFSA. They could go ahead, there's 10 slots, but they could go ahead once they process their FAFSA and click submit. Once they have received that initial student A report and the schools have already received their students' information, they could go back on their FAFSA, then delete. Let's say they have 10 more colleges that they want to send their information to. They could go ahead and delete the colleges that have already received the students' information, and then add these new colleges, submit it. And then they will receive like notifications to an A report, making sure that the schools have already received the students' information onto the FAFSA. So they're able to go ahead and, even though there's only 10 slots initially, they could go ahead and always go back, delete some, add the new ones on there that they will like to be added. But again, making sure that there's time for processing so every school still receives their information.
Yep.
I would like to throw out there, next year, they should be able to add 20, should be able to add 20 schools.
Fantastic. I will also say, if you're ever trying to convince a student to apply to fewer schools, this might be a great, hey, just so you know, you can only put 10 schools on the FAFSA. I would
Right.
never encourage you to intentionally mislead students, but you're allowed to intentionally mislead students.
Yes. And I will also add, as you're saying that too, it makes me think like, look at the students' college list, like, give them some time to think about their college list. Look also for financial safer options. You know, I know college these days, not everything is affordable. I think a lot of things in life right now are not as affordable, but looking for those financial safer schools, because once it's time for them to start reviewing their financial aid offers, they could have those backup options just in case something is like maybe they have at school, but it's so unaffordable, like the offer that they gave them. So having those like backup options, like I would say 1 to 2 on their list is super helpful.
Absolutely. So on the flip side, then, a student is completing the FAFSA. They know that they want to go to college and they want to be considered for need-based aid, but they don't know yet where they're applying. What should they do when it comes time to fill out that part of the FAFSA?
So I personally would say, pick a couple close, like pick your dream, pick your safe school, and then, you can always go back and make corrections to your FAFSA and add schools. That's not something that's set in stone. So you don't actually have to be admitted to any of these colleges that you're listing. Just list a couple and then go back and add to it if you need to.
Yeah. Mireya, anything you would add there?
Yeah, definitely. I would just say submit your FAFSA, especially you want to meet your state deadlines. Encourage them to have that. And yeah, like we said, like there's change. You could go back and make changes to your college list. Again, this could be a great time to have a conversation with your students around their college list and like thinking what they want to do, what's like help them explore. So yeah, it's good to submit your FAFSA first. Make sure to meet those deadlines. You always could go back and make those changes.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, the student has completed the FAFSA, but it's been a few days and they haven't received a confirmation email, and their colleges are saying that they haven't received the FAFSA. What has most likely gone wrong here, and how would you help students through it?
I would say like students, if they have not received their confirmation email, I would say double check like all the information that you've entered onto your FAFSA, making sure that everything looks accurately, double check the information, make sure that it was signed. There could be many reasons why it might have not been submitted, and so forth. Maybe there was like some type of error as well. So I would double check. Also, if for some reason there's still errors and everything looks okay, you could also reach out to the Federal Student Aid line. I would say calling is really helpful just to double check like, hey, what may have happened? What could be the error that could happen? Why has my confirmation page not come up, or things like that? So I would say like double check everything. And I think that's a rule of thumb with the whole FAFSA form. Double check, triple check all the information that you're entering. Double check that the social security number looks exactly as it appears on the social security card. Have your tax forms with you, your contact information. Double check that it's an email. It looks correct when you create it as well. So I would say just double check. And if not, also reach out to Federal Student Aid for any support there.
Rita, anything to add there?
No, that was really, she handled it perfect. Something's wrong with your FAFSA, and go back and look at it.
Yeah, I would say in personal experience, the most likely scenario, at least with my kids, is that they haven't actually submitted. Completing, like going through the whole process, there are more steps often than students expect there to be. You have to actually complete all the information, and then you have to sign, and then your parent has to sign, and then you have to submit. So a lot of times what's happened is that it's either been submitted without signatures or they've signed, but they forgot to hit that final submit button. So I would say starting by logging into the FAFSA with the student and going straight to that last page and just making sure that actually was submitted is where I would go first. Absolutely. We're coming up on time here, but let's go with one last one. The student completes and submits the FAFSA, but their EFC is missing from the student aid report. When they look at the SIR and you're looking for that estimated family contribution, it's just blank. What does that mean, and what do they do next?
It's pretty much that last one we just talked about. I mean, something's missing. The signature in most cases, maybe you skipped over the parent information and parent information was required, or maybe you said that you have a special circumstance. It doesn't calculate an EFC. So something's wrong with the FAFSA. Have the student log back into the FAFSA and look at it again to see what's missing. Maybe their social's wrong. Maybe something's not matching with the Social Security Administration and their name or their birthday. But that's generally there's an issue with the FAFSA itself and possibly at the student aid, I mean the FSA ID as well.
Mhm.
And parents' information is probably skipped.
Yep.
And just know that, you know, submitting and completing a FAFSA is two different things. A student can submit the FAFSA, that doesn't necessarily mean it's completed. So you have to have a completed FAFSA to get an EFC.
Yeah, absolutely. Mireya, any closing remarks there?
No, that was perfect. I would say yes, just like recommend to always reach out. Like if, for example, like special circumstances, if you still need to follow up with the college, make sure a student is following up, making sure that they talk about their situation, and be able to share all the information that they need to in case that's what's stopping that. And they're just following up, double checking, triple check everything as much as possible.
Absolutely. I'm linking the federal student aid contact page here in the chat. If I look at a student's FAFSA and I can't see right away what the error is, I always just go straight to their live chat. You may have to wait a little bit for, depending on the time of year, for someone to be available, but that has always been the easiest for me because they can usually go in and tell you, if not specifically, at least like the general area to look in for that error, and can give you some direction, which can save you a lot of time.
And
Excellent.
and
Yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna add to like the Social Security Administration phone number too is helpful. There's sometimes like some Social Security number mismatches, or if students who just receive their Social Security number, but for some reason it's not coming up on their FAFSA. Sometimes it's good just to double check with the Social Security Administration, I would say.
Yeah.
Here's just another resource. You can always reach out to your outreach specialist because we have access to FAST. So that's our state website, and we can see all the information that you submitted on your FAFSA. So we're able to look at it and kind of determine, oh, because we can see your comments from your student aid report as well. So reach out to us. You can always reach out to me because I gave you my contact information, and I can get you in touch with your outreach specialist if you do not know who it is.
Yeah, absolutely. You have lots of people in your corner. The Social Security error often comes up. I know that one of the most common errors that I saw when working with students is a mismatch between the information that was input when they created the FSA ID versus what would input in the FAFSA. Rita, you were talking about if your accountant spelled your name wrong when file your taxes. A lot of times, if the student spelled their name wrong when creating their FSA ID, that will create problems. So then they have to go in and fix it in the FSA ID. So just making sure everything matches up is often a great way to remove some of those errors. Excellent. Well, we are right at time. I want to say a huge thank you to both of our panelists for joining and talking through some of these scenarios with us. I really do appreciate it. I will send out the PowerPoint slides with all of the contact information and all of the links that we shared in the chat today afterwards, along with the recording, because I did remember to record this time. I also have put up here some of the other resources that are offered on the Path to College Tendency website. I definitely encourage you guys as counselors to go through and peruse some of these. There's a lot of FAFSA oriented stuff on each of these pages. So please dig through. Take advantage. If there's anything that you're looking for that's not there, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for attending, both our attendees and our panelists. Definitely feel free to reach out to any of us if you have questions about the FAFSA over the next few months. Otherwise, best of luck to you all and have a great rest of your semester.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.